So I'm doing a little series here on how to make your database actually good. What I'm going to assume is that you start with a table structure that is a good table structure. This takes a lot of thought up front, and it's really good to get it right from the beginning. If you find that you've got this structure wrong, and then you make lots of forms and reports based on it, you pretty much have to throw all that lot away once you fix your problem. So I strongly recommend that you actually get this checked. So see your teacher and say, me, Mr. Boateng, and say, are you happy that this is a viable data structure for what you're trying to do? It's also good to get things like the validation rules and any templates. That's not the right word. I'll come to the right word in a minute. That you want in place. Do that now, because then that will sometimes propagate nicely into your forms. So it will just make things work a bit better. So I'm just going to do a bit of example stuff around that. For instance, I've just been looking at patients, and I've added another field, gender, in here. And let's go and have a look at this patients table. So what I want to do is have a validation rule that you can pick from a valid list of genders that are available. Just a spelling thing, so you don't want to have, that you've got a query that searches for all female patients, but it misses that one patient where it was spelt incorrectly or something like that. We did a fat finger thing. So in Google Classroom, I did link to this data validation rules, which is quite a complex document. It's got quite a lot in it, but it's worth taking a little bit of time to look through. And these quick examples are actually probably as much as you want to do. You don't want it to be crazy complicated. You don't want to be sinking a lot of time into this. But it is definitely good evidence for me that you know what you're doing if you actually put data rules in. So for instance, in my database here, if I go into design view on this table and click in this gender field, I might choose to say that my validation rule, I like to do it in the actual expression builder just so I can actually see what I'm doing. It must be male or female or by gender, and it's definitely a user consideration as well to make sure. I've not capitalized that one. This is one where you could actually talk about what genders would be appropriate to have in the database to make sure everyone's included, a user consideration implication. So click OK on that, and let's just have a quick look at what that looks like. Say yes, and it's probably going to complain because I've got data in there already. So you can get yourself down a little rabbit hole if when you've put data in, test data like I have here, and then you start changing your validation rules about it, can cause you problems. Anyway, so if I go to here and I say, I'm going to misspell male, and it says, this unhelpful message here. This is not a user-friendly error message, although if you read it carefully, it does explain what the problem is. So I'm just going to go to correct, and then I'm going to go back into design view, and I'm going to say validation text. Choose from list male/female/ I do want to emphasize that this is not the list that you should be using. It's your own consideration as to what should go into that list there if you choose to do gender. So now if I go back in here and I mistype one, it gives me a much more helpful error message. So that's a nice little user consideration right there. Also in here, it's worth looking at date of birth as an option to do a validation rule. If you look at this page, it's very helpful about dates. So for instance, if you put a date of birth which is in the future, that's probably a bad date of birth, and you may have other things that you want to put in there. And as well as those rules, you can have something like you can have an input mask, and for a date of birth that would be quite an appropriate thing to do. So you would probably have like a short date as being an appropriate input mask. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that. Oh, I will say one other thing about this gender. This is a bit of a pain for someone perhaps to have to type this in. You might even consider that a better option would be to give the person a drop-down combo list, which you could do by giving them a combo bit box where it selects from a list, or you could have it as a one-to-many relationship. So it's actually a very sensible idea to have a list of genders in a separate table, and then that comes through as a lookup, and you can choose those in the combo box. So we haven't even got on to making any of the actual forms or reports or buttons or anything like that yet, and that's entirely appropriate. You shouldn't until you've really thought this through and really looked hard at your validation rules and your any formatting that you want to do. Not formatting, what did I say? It's input mask. There we go. Took a moment. Okay, so that's the first video. The next video we'll start adding some forms and such like.